Number 4. Darren Eugene Henwood. In November 2012, a 27-year-old woman walked into the police station in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, and started telling the police a horrific story. The woman said she had worked as an escort and a private dancer. In August 2008, she met a man named Darren Eugene Henwood. It wasn't long before they started dating. But then, their relationship took a dark turn. She claimed that Henwood got her addicted to cocaine. In May 2011, the bank foreclosed on Henwood's house. The woman said that Henwood blamed her for the foreclosure. He then convinced her that she owed him $700,000. To pay off the debt, he forced her to have sex with as many clients as she could. She said that many of the men were sick and disgusting. Henwood would also give her GHB, which is a date rape drug. After she passed out, he would rape her. He often photographed and videotaped the rapes, and then he would show her the photos and the videos. He did this as proof he could rape her without her even knowing about it. He then forced her to have sex with his bulldog. She said that he would take photos of it. She said he'd get me to smile, but it was so fucked up. He then used the photos as blackmail. He threatened to post all the videos and photos online and send it to her family. After the woman went to the police, Henwood was arrested and charged with sexual assault and bestiality. Then 3 other women who dated Henwood between January 2001 and August 2008 came forward with similar stories. All of them said that there were several occasions when they blacked out and they woke up to Henwood raping them. One of them said she didn't remember having sex with the dog, but Henwood told her she did while she was passed out. After the 3 women came forward, Henwood was charged with more crimes. In total, Henwood was charged with 14 different counts. Henwood pleaded guilty to 5 charges, 4 counts of sexual assault, and 1 charge of performing bestiality. Henwood had a sentencing trial in early 2015. During the trial, photographs of the woman who went to the police having sex with a dog were shown. All 4 of Henwood's ex-girlfriends testified against him. The results of the sentencing hearing were not made public, and Henwood's current whereabouts are unknown. Number 3. The Dunbar Village Rape. Dunbar Village is a 246-unit public housing community in West Palm Beach, Florida. It is the oldest public housing community in West Palm Beach and has a reputation for being crime-ridden. Then in June 2007, a crime happened there that was so shocking that it made headlines around the world. It all started at about 9 p.m. on June 18, 2007. An unidentified 35-year-old woman had returned home from her job of delivering phone books. Not long after she arrived home, a young man knocked on her door. She opened the door, and the young man told her that the tires on her vehicle were flat. She went outside to check, and she found 3 young men holding guns. They forced her to get back into the apartment. They demanded money from her, but she said she didn't have any. So they tore her clothes off, and the 4 of them took turns raping her. Then they invited 5 or 6 friends over. When the friends arrived, they all took turns raping the woman. The gang rape lasted for about 3 hours. What made the crime even more horrific is that the woman had a 12-year-old son and he was at home during the assault. In fact, he was forced to watch the gang rape. After the 9 or 10 young men were finished raping the woman, at gunpoint, they forced the woman to have sex with her 12-year-old son. Then they filled the bathtub with water and vinegar and had the mother and son get in. Then they poured bleach, alcohol, nail polish remover, and ammonia into the tub in an attempt to destroy any evidence left behind. They also poured a cleaning product directly into the 12-year-old boy's eyes. They wanted to set the mother and son on fire, but they didn't have a lighter, so they left them alive. About 30 minutes after the group left, one of the young men returned to the apartment and sexually assaulted the mother again. As he was leaving, he stole some video games. After that last attack, the mother and son sought help. Their attackers had stolen their phones, so they walked a mile to a medical center. A few days after the brutal home invasion, 14-year-old Avion Lawson was arrested because his handprint was found in the apartment. Also, his DNA was found inside one of the condoms left at the crime scene. He was interviewed by the police, and he confessed to taking part in the gang rape. He said he didn't want to rape the woman, but he was forced to. He said he was worried that if he ran away, his friends would kill him. Over the next few weeks, 3 more young men were arrested: 16-year-old Nathan Walker, 16-year-old Jacarius Taylor, and 18-year-old Tommy Poindexter. Their DNA was all found at the crime scene. 2 years after they were arrested, Avion Lewis was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The 3 other young men were sentenced to life without parole. But then, in 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that giving minors life without parole was cruel and unusual punishment. In 2016, that ruling was made retroactive. So Nathan Walker and Jacarius Taylor, who were both 16 at the time of the home invasion, had their sentences changed to 60 years in prison. Number 2. Matthew Falder. In 2012, several national law enforcement agencies that were monitoring a HurtCore forum on the dark web became aware of a user who went by the name In the Garden. HurtCore is a term used to describe extreme pornography that often includes minors and violence. Then in August 2013, the FBI started to pay more attention to In the Garden. When he posted on the dark web forum, his icon was of a young girl. He wrote that the girl was his daughter, and he asked for suggestions on what he should do to her. The FBI then passed on their findings to the United Kingdom's National Crime Agency, which goes by the acronym NCA. Over the next 4 years, the NCA, along with law enforcement agencies in the United States, New Zealand, Australia, Israel, and Europe, investigated In the Garden. They learned that he also posted on the dark web under the usernames 666devil and Evil Mind. But whoever was doing the postings was very careful to cover his online tracks. Nevertheless, the law enforcement agencies kept investigating him. During that time, In the Garden posted some disturbing photos and videos of young men and women. Some were as young as 14 years old. The investigators learned that he found a lot of his victims through a website called Gumtree. Gumtree is a popular website in the UK that is similar to Craigslist or Kijiji. He made postings on Gumtree posing as a depressed female artist named Liz, Jess, or Shona. He would tell people that he would pay them money for photos of them naked or partially nude. He would get the photos, but he would never pay them the money. Instead, he would use the photos as blackmail to make them take pictures or record videos of themselves doing very degrading things. This included licking toilets and licking used tampons. With another person, he forced them to drink urine and eat feces. He had another person eat dog food. Also, he would get people to pin pieces of paper to themselves with tacks. Degrading messages were written on the papers. With one young man, he made him stand on the tacks. Easily, the worst thing he did was blackmail a father to rape his 2-year-old son. Pictures of these people doing these horrible things were then posted on different hardcore websites on the dark web. Eventually, one of the investigating agencies learned that the person making the postings lived in Birmingham, England. In April 2017, Matthew Falder, who lived in Birmingham, was identified as in the garden. Falder had a PhD from the University of Cambridge. He specialized in seismic oceanography. When he was unmasked, he was working at the University of Birmingham as a lecturer, and he was doing postdoctoral research. After Falder was identified, the NCA followed him for 2 months. On June 21, 2017, he was arrested at his workplace. After he was arrested, the police discovered other crimes that he had committed. He had secretly installed cameras in public bathrooms, the homes of family members, and even around his own home. He also hid a camera in his parents' bedroom. He would then use the footage as blackmail, or he would post it online. In October 2017, Falder pleaded guilty to 137 charges involving 46 victims. He was given a sentence of 32 years in prison. His sentence was later reduced to 25 years. It is suspected that Falder targeted at least 300 people. At least 3 of his victims attempted suicide. Matthew Falder is considered one of the most prolific sex criminals in the United Kingdom. Number 1. James Kohut, Rochelle Brandon, and Emily Stevens. In the spring of 2017, 43-year-old Rochelle Brandon of Watsonville, California, and her husband were getting a divorce. In May 2017, her husband was going through some videos that were on a GoPro camera. What he saw in one of the videos was so shocking that he had to go to the police. In the video, his wife and another woman were having sex with one of his children and 2 other children. The police brought Rochelle Brandon in for questioning, and they looked through her phone. What they uncovered was truly shocking, even to the seasoned investigators. It turned out that the other woman in the video was 31-year-old Emily Stevens, who lived in Tucson, Arizona. The kids who were being abused in the video were Brandon's son and Stevens' son and daughter. Both boys were 10 years old, and the girl was 3 years old. The police learned that Brandon and Steven knew each other because they were both in a relationship with a man named James Kohut. Kohut was a 58-year-old brain surgeon who lived in Santa Cruz, California. Rochelle Brandon was a nurse at the same hospital. In October 2016, Kohut and Brandon started a sexual relationship. By that time, Kohut had been romantically involved with Stevens for about 8 years. Stevens was also a nurse, and she met Kohut online. Both relationships were extramarital for Kohut. He had married a gynecologist in 1988, and they had 2 children. It turned out that Stevens was pregnant, and she thought that Kohut was the father. Stevens planned on telling Kohut's wife that he got her pregnant. Kohut found out that Stevens was planning on doing this, so Kohut had Stevens bring 2 of her children to Brandon's home. Kohut then directed Stevens to rape her children while Brandon recorded it. He also made the children have sex with each other. Brandon also took part in the sexual activities. Kohut then told Stevens that if she told his wife about their affair, then he would take the video of her having sex with her kids to the police. Kohut was arrested a few days after Brandon's husband brought the video to the police. It turned out that Kohut had been on the police's radar since 1997. Kohut had a very unusual fantasy. He wanted to have what he called a taboo family. He wanted to have a wife and children who lounged around naked and had sex with each other. Over the span of 20 years, on the internet, Kohut contacted several women living in different states and different countries. If the woman he was talking to had a child or children, he wanted to have sex with them. If the woman didn't have any children, he wanted to get her pregnant so that they could raise the child sexually. Although the police received several complaints about Kohut, they never found enough evidence to arrest him. After Kohut was arrested with Stevens and Brandon, a former victim of his came forward. She said in 2004, when she was 14, Kohut sexually abused her. The police also found more videos and photos of Kohut abusing Stevens and Brandon's children. The children were 10, 5, and 3 years old when the photos and videos were made. The police also found footage of Kohut forcing the children to have sex with each other. Many times, the children were not willing participants, and they were forced to rape each other. James Kohut, Rochelle Brandon, and Emily Stevens are currently being held in jail until their trial, which is supposed to start in June 2019. If they are convicted, they could be sentenced to life in prison. Number 3. Convolay Nagathi. Port St. John is a picturesque town on South Africa's wild coast. It has 2 mountain peaks and 3 beaches. The village is home to about 6,500 people. One of those residents was 4-year-old Convolay Nagathi. Convolay's name means bright future. On the afternoon of Easter Sunday 2017, Convolay was out playing with friends. When he didn't return home, his family became worried, and they started searching for him. Kamale's 7-year-old grandmother, Nantatsulo Guanye, was one of the searchers. Early on the morning of Easter Monday, Nantatsulo's sister suggested that she go to the home of her son, 30-year-old Mandisi Guana. She said she feared he was in the grips of Satan and she did not trust him. She had good reason not to trust him. About 8 months earlier, Mandisi had been released from prison after serving 7 years for murder. Nantatsulo went to Mandisi's home at about 2 a.m. Mandisi opened the door, but he refused to let his aunt inside. Nantatsulo forced her way in, and she saw that his home was covered in blood. At first, she thought that a pig had been slaughtered in his home. Then she saw little human body parts scattered throughout the home, and she started screaming. Her scream stirred the neighbors, who came running. When they got there, they alerted the police, and Mandisi was arrested. In custody, he confessed to his horrible crime. He said he brought 4-year-old Kamale back to his home and skinned him alive. He then dismembered him, drank his blood, ate his heart, and ate part of his brain. A month after he was arrested, Mandisi had a bail hearing. He said he didn't want bail and he just wanted to plead guilty and to be sentenced. He said he had no faith in his lawyer and he didn't need a lawyer. The judge decided that Mandisi should undergo a psychiatric evaluation. After the judge made his ruling, Mandisi told the court, "I am tired of this shit happening here. You've been making me wait here while you're busy talking nonsense." In January 2018, Mandisi was found unfit to stand trial, and he was committed to a psychiatric hospital. Number 2. Kazuno Zoda. In the fall of 1998, 23-year-old Kazuno Zoda was studying religion at a university in Krakow, Poland. It was her third field of study. She had tried history and psychology, but she felt that they weren't right for her. Zoda was shy and a bit of a loner. She was an only child, and the only living family she had was her mother. 2 years earlier, Zoda and her father had been hiking in the mountains, and her father fell. He later died in the hospital. The loss of her father hit Zoda hard, and she was often depressed. Zoda's mother didn't think she was dating anyone in the autumn of 1998. On November 12, 1998, Zoda had a doctor's appointment at 6 p.m., but she never arrived. She also didn't come home that night, so her mother reported her missing. On January 6, 1999, about 2 months after she went missing, a man was on a boat on the Vistula River on the outskirts of Krakow. Suddenly, there was a problem with his outboard motor. He looked and saw something odd wrapped up in the propeller. It turned out to be human skin. Specifically, it was the skin from the torso of a woman. The man immediately called the police. At first, the police thought that there was a body in the water and the skin came off when the propeller hit the body. But then forensic investigators were able to determine that wasn't the case. Instead, the skin had been removed from the body before it went into the water. The police were able to determine that the skin belonged to 23-year-old Kazuno Zoda. The rest of the river was searched and part of her leg and part of her buttocks were found, but the rest of her body has never been found. The gruesome crime made headlines across Poland, and the public demanded answers. But the police kept the details of the investigation secret. They didn't enlist the help of the FBI, but the FBI's involvement did not lead to an arrest. Slowly, over the years, details of the investigation began to leak out. The police thought it was possible that Zoda had died by suicide and someone found her body and then skinned her. After all, Zoda had been depressed over the death of her father before she went missing. But the forensic evidence strongly suggested she was alive when she was skinned. The police thought that the skin had been removed so that the killer could wear it. The police immediately noticed similarities between the crime and the crimes perpetrated by Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. In fact, they thought it was possible that the killer was inspired by the novel or the movie. The police also thought that the killer was a doctor, or had training as a doctor, or he had experience in dissections. They thought this because the skin had been expertly removed. On the skin, they found bruises. Based on the bruises, forensic experts thought that the killer had martial arts training. But that was all the police thought they knew about the killer. For years, the case sat cold. In 2012, the police reopened the case, but once again, they made no arrests. In 2016, cold case investigators took another crack at it, and they had a bit more luck. In October 2017, 19 years after the murder, the police announced that they made an arrest. The man was only identified as 52-year-old Robert J. At the time of the murder, Robert would have been 31 years old. He had been a suspect from the start, but the police never had enough evidence to charge him. When the police were investigating in 2016, they noticed that Robert kept visiting Zoda's grave. They looked deeper into his background, and what they found made them even more suspicious of him. Robert's father was a poet, and he was very abusive. He abandoned the family when Robert was still young, and Robert was raised by his mother, who was a religious zealot. Robert was a problem child. He was expelled from school because of his disruptive behavior. He was also known to torture cats and dogs. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Robert was doing his compulsory military service. For his military service, he worked at a hospital where he helped perform autopsies. After he finished his military service in the early 1990s, he moved to Canada. He moved back to Krakow in 1998, the year before Zoda was killed. When he got back to Krakow, he worked at the Institute of Zoology at the same university that Zoda attended. At the institute, Robert learned to skin animals. After Zoda's murder, Robert became very religious. He attended church every week, and he sat in the front row every time. The forensic experts thought that Zoda's killer had martial arts training, and Robert had taken martial arts classes. Robert didn't have a criminal record, but he did have a history of stalking and harassing women. Finally, the police confidently believed that Robert and Zoda knew each other. They thought that they met at a market that they both frequented. The police even speculated that they were dating. What the police think happened is that, on the day that Zoda disappeared, Robert came to her flat and convinced her to come out. He drove her to his summer house, which was in a quiet area outside of Krakow. In November, not many people would have been in the area. They think he kept her alive for a day or two, during which time he tortured her. He then skinned her alive. The police aren't sure if she was conscious when she was skinned. The police also aren't sure what he did with the rest of the body. Robert is still being held in jail, and he has yet to be charged with murder. The police said that they are looking for irrefutable evidence that he was the killer. They found blood in his summer house, and it is still being tested. A judge has ruled that Robert will be held until September 22, 2019. If he isn't charged by then, he'll be released. Robert has denied killing Katarzyna Zoda, and he claims that he didn't even know her. Number 1. Michael Ryan. Michael Ryan was born in August 1948. In the spring of 1982, when he was in his early 30s, he was driving a truck and he was living in Whiting, Kansas with his wife and his 3 children. He had a violent temper and he beat both his wife and his children. One night in May 1982, Michael went to hear a man named James Wickstrom speak. Wickstrom was the leader of a far-right anti-government white supremacist group called the Posse Comitatus. Wickstrom preached about a conspiracy theory that Jews were using the American government to destroy the American farmer. Wickstrom also said that white Anglo-Saxons are the real Israelites and God's chosen people. Michael, who was raised as a Baptist, was inspired by Wickstrom's crazy bullshit. Michael always seemed to have problems in life. For example, when he was a teenager, he lost some toes in a hunting accident. He didn't graduate from high school, and he blamed the teachers. He could never hold down a job, and he always blamed his bosses after he was fired. Not long after Michael heard Wickstrom speak, he was hurt on the job, and he had to go on welfare. After listening to Wickstrom, Michael now thought that he didn't personally fail at life. Instead, it was all a strategy by the Jews to keep him down. Michael then became a devoted follower of Wickstrom. Rick Stice grew up on an 80-acre farm near Rulo, Nebraska. In 1976, when he was 16, he got married to a 16-year-old girl named Sandra. They went on to have 3 children, Ora, Barry, and Luke. They all lived on the farm where Rick grew up. In the spring of 1982, the family was having financial difficulties. To save money, they canceled their health insurance. A month after they did, Sandra was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. Their financial troubles and the fear of Sandra's death made both Rick and Sandra desperate people. They soon found themselves attracted to the teachings of Wickstrom. Sandra underwent chemotherapy, which was paid for by welfare, but it didn't help her. By the spring of 1982, Sandra was dying. Then on Easter weekend 1982, Sandra disappeared in the middle of the night. Where she went and what happened to her is unknown. After she left, Rick became close with Michael Ryan and 3 of his friends, James Tim, David Andreas, and Jimmy Haverkamp. By the time Rick joined the group, Michael was telling people that he was talking directly to God, whom he called Yahweh. Michael preached that the Battle of Armageddon was imminent and they needed to prepare for it. James, Andreas, Jimmy, and Rick all believed him, and this was the start of Michael's cult. One night in the autumn of 1982, Michael said he had embodied the spirit of the Archangel Michael and he would lead them in the Battle of Armageddon. To prepare for the battle, they needed to stockpile food, guns, explosives, and other weapons. To pay for all their supplies, they started stealing cattle and selling it. The cult eventually grew to include family members of the initial followers. In the spring of 1984, the cult moved on to Rick Stice's farm, just outside Rouleau, Nebraska. On the farm, Michael acted like a tyrant. He even went as far as to pick what clothes the women would wear each day. He justified everything he did by saying he was doing what Yahweh commanded. While Michael expected everyone to do work around the farm, he did very little himself. Most of the time he sat around, watched TV, smoked pot, and drank 7-Up. Michael slept with all the female cult members, even if they were married to other cult members. He was also terribly abusive to everyone. But he had a special kind of hatred for Rick Stice's 5-year-old son, Luke. He would call Luke a mongrel and a dog, and he would beat him. One time in the winter of 1984, he made Luke strip and roll around in the snow. Another time, he made Luke put the barrel of a gun in his mouth and told him to pull the trigger. Luke ended up wetting his pants because he was so scared. Michael made him change his pants, and then he continued to torment him. Michael ended up shooting Luke in the arm in front of his father, Rick. Michael said he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he said that Yahweh fired the gun. The wound wasn't too serious, so Luke wasn't taken to the hospital. He was just given first aid on the farm. After the shooting, Rick decided it was time to leave the cult. He ended up sneaking away. He left his 3 children behind. The problem was that Rick couldn't find anywhere to go, so he was forced to return to the cult, which was living on his farm. When Rick got back, Michael wanted him to prove his loyalty to Yahweh. So he made Rick rape a goat. Afterward, to ensure he didn't run away again, Rick was stripped naked and chained up. Michael's abuse of Luke only got worse. Not only would Michael beat him, but he did a lot of horrible degrading stuff to him as well. This included spitting in his mouth and putting cigarette ash in his mouth. But after a while, this type of abuse wasn't enough for Michael, so he came up with new ways to torture the father and son. For example, he made them perform oral sex on each other while the rest of the men in the cult watched. Another time, he commanded one of his followers, James Tim, to rape Rick. But James had problems penetrating Rick. So Michael ordered James to stick a veterinarian syringe in Rick's anus to loosen him up. James did as he was told. But the syringe didn't have the desired effect, and James wasn't able to penetrate Rick. Michael called them queers and left Rick alone for the rest of the night. Not long afterward, in March 1985, James Tim was shot in the face by Michael's 15-year-old son, Dennis Ryan. It was supposedly an accident. The bullet went through James's left cheek and out the right side of his face. Despite not being taken to the hospital, James survived. After the shooting, Michael started to torment James as well. Several weeks after the shooting, Michael was beating and berating Rick and James. When he was done, he stormed out of the room. As he entered the hallway, he encountered Luke. Mike pushed the 5-year-old out of his way. Luke hit his head on a bookcase and lost consciousness. Michael said that Yahweh told him that Luke didn't need any medical attention. But Michael was wrong. During the night, 5-year-old Luke Stice passed away. It is thought that he died of a broken neck. Michael forced Luke's father, Rick, and James Tim to bury Luke's body on the farm. Michael told the rest of his followers that Luke simply died in his sleep. A few weeks later, on April 26, 1985, Michael ordered his wife, Ruth, to cook a wild turkey. But when she did, something went wrong, and the turkey ended up inedible. Michael said that Yahweh told him that James Tim sabotaged the turkey. So he ordered David Andreas to make James have sex with a goat as punishment. David did as he was told, and he watched James as he had sex with the goat. That evening, Michael ordered James to be chained up outside all night. The next morning, Michael rounded up his 15-year-old son Dennis, David Andreas, Jimmy Haverkamp, and a new member, Tim Haverkamp, who was Jimmy's cousin. They surrounded James, who watched as Michael raped him with the handle of a shovel. Michael then made Dennis, David, Jimmy, and Tim take turns raping James with the handle of the shovel. While Dennis was raping him, James's rectum ruptured. When they were done raping him with the handle of the shovel, he was hung by his arms from an overhead pipe in the barn. Then Michael lashed his back dozens of times with a bullwhip. Once Michael was done whipping him, the other men untied James. Michael said that Yahweh told him that James shouldn't get medical care. Michael said that they should leave him to die, or he could leave the farm on his own if he wanted to. But at this point, James was too weak to walk away from the farm. The next morning, Michael and the other cult members went back to James, who was somehow still alive. This time, they strung him up in a crucifix position, and they took turns lashing his chest with a bullwhip. Then they took him down, and 2 of the men held James's right hand to the ground. Then Michael pulled out a gun and shot off the tip of James's right index finger. He then made Dennis shoot his middle finger, then Tim shot his ring finger, Jimmy was forced to shoot his little finger, and then David shot off his thumb. After shooting all the fingers off his right hand, Michael kept kicking James in the left arm until his arm broke. After brutally torturing James, the men went and had lunch. Once they were done lunch, Michael, Dennis, and Tim went back to torturing James. Using a razor blade, Michael cut a strip of flesh that was 3 inches by 8 inches on James's calf. He then pulled the skin off. Then 15-year-old Dennis tried skinning James. He cut some flesh on James's calf, but his hands were too sweaty, so he couldn't pull the skin off. So he got a pair of pliers, and then he was able to pull the skin off. Dennis and Tim then decided to break James's legs. Michael supposedly talked with Yahweh, and he said they should do it. So they rested both of his ankles on wooden blocks. Dennis struck one leg with a lead pipe, and it broke James's leg. Then Tim did the same thing on James's other leg. Then Michael jumped up and down on James's chest, and this finally killed the 26-year-old man. They dug a grave for him close to where Luke was buried. As James's body was lying in the grave, Michael ordered Tim to shoot James in the head, even though he was clearly already dead. Michael said he wanted James's death to look like an execution. When James was killed, one of the cult members, Lisa, was very pregnant. Nearly a year earlier, Michael had made Lisa and Rick get married, but he had ordered them not to consummate the marriage. But they did consummate the marriage, and Lisa became pregnant. This is one reason that Michael started treating Rick poorly. He had done something Michael had forbidden him to do. Lisa went into labor the day after James Tim was killed. Michael delivered the baby at the farm. Even though Lisa didn't see a doctor once during her pregnancy, and she had no professional medical care when she delivered the baby boy was born healthy. Then on June 25, 1985, David Andreas and Jimmy Haverkamp were pulled over while pulling a stolen crop spreader. They were arrested and the truck they were driving was impounded. The truck's tire treads were compared to tire marks left at other robberies in the area. They were a match. The police decided it was time to raid the farm. The police knew that Michael and his followers had stocked weapons, and they were worried there was going to be a shootout. But the police were able to convince Michael to allow them on the property peacefully. Michael was arrested for having illegal weapons, but he posted bail and he was released. Meanwhile, David and Jimmy remained in prison on theft charges. Michael told David and Jimmy to take the fall for everything and leave him out of it. After the raid, the FBI got involved with the investigation. The agent assigned to the case tracked down Rick Stice. At first, Rick didn't want to help with the investigation. But then, 2 months after he was tracked down, in August 1985, Rick told the FBI agent who was working on the case that Michael had killed Luke and had him buried on the farm. Around the same time, David and Jimmy decided to tell the police about the cult's activities, including telling them about the murder of James Tim. On August 18th, Michael was arrested for interstate transportation of stolen goods, and he was placed in jail. While he was in prison, the farm was searched, and the bodies of Luke Stice and James Tim were found. After the bodies were found, Michael was charged with the murders of Luke and James, and the other cult members, including Michael's 15-year-old son, Dennis, were charged with James's murder. In May 1986, Michael Ryan was found guilty of killing James, and he pleaded no contest to the second-degree murder of Luke. He was sentenced to death. Dennis Ryan, who was 15 at the time of James's murder, was tried as an adult. He was found guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. His conviction was eventually overturned because improper instructions were given to the jury. Instead of going to trial again, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. He was released after serving just over 11 years. David Andreas and James Haverkamp were both convicted of second-degree murder in the death of James. They were both sentenced to 26 years in prison. They both served about 13 years, and then they were paroled. Tim Haverkamp pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. He was paroled in 2009 after serving 23 years in prison. Michael Ryan was never executed by the state. Instead, he died of natural causes at the age of 66 while he was in prison. And that's all for this month. Thank you so much for listening, and of course, thank you so much for donating. Until next month, Thanks again.